All right, welcome back. Today, 40 years ago, one of the most consequential moments in international finance unfolded in secrecy at the famed Plaza Hotel overlooking Central Park in New York City. It was there, September 22nd, 1985, when the UK, France, Japan, and West Germany joined forces to formally help the United States devalue the dollar. It was a day of intrigue that began shortly after midnight when the Treasury Department confirmed news reports that the finance ministers and central bank heads of the 5 leading non-communist industrial nations would meet that Sunday. The Treasury refused to share details, but the meeting came one day before President Ronald Reagan was scheduled to make a speech proposing measures to promote U.S. exports. Now, remember, the U.S. was in a bit of a bind at the time. The U.S. had largely through its own monetary policies had seen the dollar depreciate by more than 60% in the early 1980s. That made U.S. goods too expensive for overseas buyers. The trade deficit widening to a record, the U.S. manufacturing sector squeezed, and Congress had started to threaten haphazard trade interventions. At about 3 p.m. on that Monday, September 23rd, the finance ministers issued a communiqué in a very stilted language that laid out the case for how exchange rates play a role in adjusting external trade imbalances and said that they stood, quote, ready to cooperate on the orderly appreciation of the main non-dollar currencies to better reflect fundamental economic conditions. For days following this so-called Plaza Accord, there was confusion as to how exactly this would all work out. The market actually ended up doing a lot of the heavy lifting, though, that would have otherwise involved the Treasury actively buying and selling currencies, to push down the dollar. Over the next 3 years, the dollar would indeed slump intentionally by more than 40%. And while the Plaza Accord was fraught with many pitfalls that would largely see the deal unravel a few years later, it still stands as a landmark of economic cooperation by individual nations to directly confront a global problem. The dollar to this day has never regained the pre-Plaza Accord highs. And that meeting on this day 40 years ago would develop into what is now the G7 Finance Ministers Group, which has continued to meet every year since.